everyone. Welcome back to the next session of our wonderful conference. We are in, what are we in, day 2 now, with 3 more full days to go, and I know you're enjoying yourselves. There's been incredible speakers and incredible information exchange. So my name is Wendy Howell. I'm the CEO of Executive Council Network. We are big fans of Stelios, One Business World, and these conferences. So we're actually not only a host for this, but also lost my train of thought. So I'll just go on from there. The next person that we have is going to be talking about something that's a special interest to me, the secret sauce for leading transformational change. So we're very lucky to have another great leader with us today, Ian Ziskin. He is the president of XL Group. And Ian, I'm going to turn it over to you. Go for it.
Great, Wendy. Thank you. Appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to be here with everyone today. It's great to be with you. Just about 30 seconds worth of context before we dive into our topic for today. Spent about 40 years over my career working in the human resources and leadership space, both for big companies as a chief HR officer, but also more recently as a coach and consultant, where I do a lot of work, not only with big companies, but also with a lot of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial organizations as a member of boards and advisory boards and as an advisor to a number of these different companies. And had the great pleasure over the course of this last year also to have an opportunity to write a book, which is in fact called The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change. Our timing's great because it actually just came out. It was released last week. And what I want to do today, because of the entrepreneurial bent that all of you have, is share with you some lessons learned and some insights from the book, particularly those that I think will have the most resonance for and relevance to all of you as entrepreneurs. And I'm fortunate not only to be in a position as the lead author of this book to offer my perspective to it, but I like to say that we had about 200 people contribute to this book and their voices and put it together in under 200 pages, 199 to be exact. So it's a little more accessible perhaps than some of the 350-page books that we've all read. One of the things that we try to attack in the book, pretty early on, is to begin to position some key questions for answers. One of which has to do with what does successful transformational change look like, and what do the leaders who lead it typically do, that works fairly well. On the flip side, as you might imagine, we also try to examine in those circumstances where we so often fail to lead transformational change successfully, why and what happens. We also have this hypothesis that we explore a bit in the book, goes something like this: all transformation is change, but is all change transformational? Turns out, the punchline is the answer is no, not all change is transformational. And I think there are some distinguishing characteristics that we explore in the book, some of which I'll touch on briefly today. And we also try to pay a lot of attention to what I'd have to say is probably my favorite question in the leading of transformational change, which is from what to what? And what I mean by that is most leaders, most teams, most organizations tend to put a lot of energy and focus and emphasis on where they're going to, what they're trying to change, what they're trying to do differently, what they're trying to improve and deliver better results, all of which, of course, makes perfect sense. The only problem with that is we also often skip over where we're coming from, the understanding of the baseline that we're beginning from in order to judge or measure improvement. What do we have to preserve so that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, in terms of what got us here and what made us successful up to this point. And that's why the from what and the to what turns out to be pretty important. One of the other things that I took a look at in pulling this book together was, believe it or not, the question of what does pizza have to do with leading transformational change? And I'll come back to that as we get toward the latter part of our conversation today. But in heading down the path of answering a lot of these questions, discovered pretty quickly that leadership in general, and certainly leading transformational change specifically, has an awful lot to do with reconciling competing priorities and mastering paradox. In other words, two competing things can in fact be true at the same time. And a big part of what we have to do as leaders of transformational change is to reconcile those competing priorities. And first, it helps to understand what some of those competing priorities are. In the book, I talk primarily about 7 paradoxes, in particular, what I like to describe as the beauty of and. And I'll just give you a couple of examples for purposes of our time together here. One has to do with the importance of reconciling facts and feelings. Most of us know that we put together a compelling business plan and business proposition and products and services and start a company, all based on the premise that there's, in part, some data that tells us that there's a need. There's some interest in the marketplace. Somebody cares about what we might deliver as a product or service. And all of that data and all of those facts, of course, are extraordinarily important. However, we also discover in the arena of leading transformational change that people have an amazing capacity to ignore or dismiss or deny data that doesn't really correspond directly to their preferred view of the world. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more about that problem in a few minutes. So data is important, facts are important, but it also turns out that human nature being what it is, feelings also matter a lot. The best analogy I can offer you for right now that I talk about in the book is, lots of people get on a scale, they're contemplating the idea of losing weight. The scale is staring back at them with some data that says they're 10 pounds overweight, and they know factually what they have to do. Usually it involves some combination of diet and exercise. But whether or not people take those actions to diet and exercise is almost wholly dependent, not on the facts, not on their weight, but how they feel about it, what's inside their heart and their head, and their willingness to take action. And that's a lot more about feeling than it is about facts. A second set of paradoxes that I find has been extraordinarily important in the area of leading transformational change is the reconciliation of speed and rhythm. And of course, most of us know, particularly anybody who's an entrepreneur, knows that speed can be a competitive advantage, speed to market, speed to new ideas, speed to innovation, speed to execution. So don't hear me saying speed is not important. And it's also true in leading transformational change. Most people will tell you that if there's a regret, it's typically not that they went too fast, but that they went too slowly. The problem with all of that, however, is rhythm also is extremely important. Best analogy I can offer there is music and musicians. For any of us who've either played in a band or tried to play in a band or dreamed about playing in a band, one of the things that you pretty quickly recognize is that rarely is a song enhanced by playing it faster and getting to the end more quickly than was intended, especially if you leave the other musicians behind. So it's all about rhythm and cadence, getting everybody on the same page, playing in harmony at the same pace with a rhythm that everybody can relate to. It's not about speed. And so speed without rhythm generally comes out as noise, if you think about it both musically and organizationally, and being able to balance the two, speed and rhythm, matters a lot. Those are just a couple of examples of the 7 paradoxes that we explore more deeply in the book. Now, as we were getting deeper and deeper into learning about what it takes to successfully lead transformational change, as you might imagine, not only did we begin to identify some things that people should do, the secret sauce, if you will, which we'll come back to, but also a series of things that you should not do if you want to successfully lead transformational change. And here again, just a couple of examples for those who might try to avoid some of the pitfalls. that many people we took a look at actually repeatedly made. One has to do with don't make people feel stupid or disloyal if they push back or ask tough, difficult questions along the way in the spirit of trying to better understand what the change is that's required and how we're going to get there. A second thing that we see over and over and over again that does tend to get in the way of successfully leading transformational change goes back to this point about facts and feelings that I just mentioned a minute ago, is people have this almost uncanny ability to ignore data that does not reinforce their preferred view of the internal or the external environment. And the better you are at denying data that's all available to you, both internally and externally, the higher the likelihood that you'll fall on your face in an effort to lead transformational change. And then the final one I'll touch on very briefly is there's oftentimes a lot of confusion between difference and improvement. A lot of people make changes. A lot of people say that they want to do things differently. Not as many people pay attention to whether those things that they're doing differently, in fact, drive improvement, drive better results, drive improved performance. And it's very easy to confuse the motion of doing things differently with the progress of actually driving improvement along the way. Now, as I was working my way through this process of pulling the book together, I also discovered something really humbling and important, I think, which is that, you know, whenever you write a book, I think the general expectation is that you're going to convey some knowledge and perspective that'll be helpful to other people. And I'm hopeful that the book will do that. But I also discovered, of course, that you should learn something too in writing a book. For any of you who've had that experience, it's really important, I think, for the people doing the writing to also learn something. So there was a series of ahas, you know, that jumped out at me, and I'll just share a couple I think that are particularly relevant to those of us who have roles as entrepreneurs. Probably the first and most important one from my perspective was the fact that leaders are really important in leading transformational change. That would seem fairly obvious. But what's actually more important is leadership. And what I mean by that is that anyone can play a leadership role at any level of the organization, whether or not their title conveys that awesome responsibility of being a leader on them. It has a lot more to do with you know, their interest in actively participating and being engaged and being an influencer and a supporter of what we're doing. And we'll talk some more about influencers in a bit. But leadership is much more important, I find, than actually being a leader. And then the second one I wanted to mention for our purposes today is that there's a lot of debate in literature and research and people with experience about leading change as to whether or not people actually embrace change or whether they hate change. And we, you know, all have our different opinions, but I'll share with you mine as a result of going through the experience of writing this book. I actually do believe that most people hate change. However, I think people hate failure even more. And so if you're looking to try to appeal to people's sense of motivation and where the support for transformational change may come from, I'd say put less energy into trying to convince them not to hate change and put more energy into trying to persuade them that failure to act, failure to drive transformational change and participate in it will actually improve the organization's and their personal chance of failure. And people love to win. And so if you can draw a somewhat direct line between taking action and driving change and improving the individual, the team, the organization's chance of winning in the marketplace, you actually have a much better chance of bringing people along with you in terms of their support for and engagement in leading transformational change. Now, as the title of this presentation and the book might imply, the secret sauce for leading transformational change, we actually found in pulling the book together that there is, in fact, a secret sauce for leading transformational change. There's 10 elements that we talk about in the book for purposes of our time together here today. I'm just going to cover on a few of them briefly. The first one has to do with the concept of start with truth, talent, and timing. And here's what I mean by those things. Truth is all about confronting and defining the reality. We are where we are. The situation is what it is. We can spend an awful lot of wasted energy hoping it was something else, preferring that it was something else, or just ignoring it altogether. That almost never works. And so the quicker you get yourself and your team and your organization to start with the truth and confront the reality of what you're facing in terms of your business dynamics, or even at a personal level, things that you're trying to change in your own life, the quicker you'll get to some traction on making progress. The second element of timing turns out to be really important here because, as I mentioned earlier, rarely do people regret going too fast. They typically will look back on a big transformational change effort and say, I wish I'd moved more quickly. I really moved way too slowly. And we put the whole effort, way behind schedule and didn't get the traction that we needed in time because I was way too deliberate and moved too slowly. And now, in the spirit of doing that, talent really matters. Leaders matter in driving transformational change. However, no one does it alone. And so surrounding yourself with really strong people who can help get things done is extraordinarily important. And that might be true, by the way, if you're an entrepreneur running your own show with no of your own employees, you still have an ecosystem of people that you're interacting with on a regular basis in building your business. That will be extraordinarily important to you and your success. You're not going to be able to do it all by yourself. That's absolutely certain. The last point, or the second point that I'll make around secret sauce ingredients, second out of 10 in total, is what I ended up describing in the book as love, influencers, and resistors. There tends to be this natural gravitation toward people who have the same vision and passion that we do, who reinforce our view of the world and tell us that we're right and provide a lot of enthusiastic support. Those people are extraordinarily important to us in leading transformational change. They're absolutely essential, but they're not enough. The other side of the equation that's equally, perhaps even more important, is identifying who are the resistors, the people who are likely to push back, to ask those tough questions that I alluded to a little while ago, who are in some ways the designated skeptics of the organization, whose job really is to seek the truth, try to figure out whether what's being asked of them in driving transformational change is really necessary. Are we on the right path to doing it? And sometimes those questions can be annoying, or they can be perceived as resistance, and they in fact may be, but they also can be unbelievably helpful to us in ferreting out some of the tough decisions and things that we've been avoiding and not paying adequate attention to, that are really important to address if you're going to successfully lead transformational change. And one of the side benefits of paying attention to both the influencers and the resistors is that it tends to render the organization chart, whether you have a large organization or a small organization, the organization chart supposedly tells us who interacts with whom and who's in charge and what the hierarchy is and how people hand off work to one another. But actually, most organizations have a much more unseen, informal way of getting work done. And knowing who the influencers are and who the resistors are, irrespective of what the org chart tells us about their job title or responsibilities, is probably more important than paying attention to the org chart. Now, in wrapping up my comments today, I mentioned that one of the things we explore in the book is this analogy about pizza. And what does pizza have to do with leading transformational change? I call it a pizza analogy, not surprisingly. And here's kind of the way I tend to think about it. Pizza was thought to be invented in 997 AD in Gaeta, Italy. It's been around for well over 1,000 years. There's a lot of tradition. Yet at the same time, if you think about shapes, sizes, toppings, cheeses, crusts, preparations, access outlets, various secret sauces, pizza has constantly been reimagined, reinvented, repositioned, all in response to a wide variety of external and internal forces, many of which those in the pizza industry do not control in order to remain relevant and viable. And I think there's a lesson in there for all of us, which is longevity and tradition in the environment that we're operating in these days is absolutely, almost completely irrelevant. Understanding what needs to change, when it needs to change, having the courage to make those changes, whether you've got a business that's in a traditional marketplace or a completely new and emerging marketplace that's being defined by the moment, hanging on to traditions and failing to reimagine, reinvent, reposition, whether it's pizza or just about any other type of pursuit you might be in, is kind of a deadly strategy. And we explore that fairly deeply in the book. So I kind of leave you with this final quote before we stop and take some questions. Believe in yourself, because if cauliflower can become pizza, you can become anything. And if you have an interest in learning a little bit more about the principles of leading transformational change or taking a look at the book, you can do all of that one-stop shop on our book website, which is www.transformationalchangebook.com, where you can see some chapter summaries, you can learn about the contributing authors, and of course, you can also order copies of the book or take care of other things that you might want to do, like speaking engagements and that sort of thing related to the book. But I look forward to interacting with you on that at another time. For now, I see we've got just a few minutes left, and I'm going to stop and pause here for a bit and just see if we have any questions from any of you about something I touched on, or perhaps something I didn't mention that you might have expected me to address.
Great discussion. And may I say, Ian, that's my favorite quote of the entire day. If cauliflower can become a pizza, you can do anything. I love that. Very, very good. One other question is the book also available on Amazon or for Kindle or anything like that, in case folks are interested?
Yes. So a couple of things. If you go on to this website that I just mentioned, you'll be able to order it at a discount through our publisher, which is Routledge. However, it's also available through Amazon and a variety, actually, of other platforms. I don't believe it's currently being offered at a discount since it's so new, but it's available there as well. It's also available in ebook format too.
And congratulations. That's a huge feat, I know. And keeping it under 200 pages and filled with wisdom, go you. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah, my next book is going to be a book about writing a book, because it's a whole experience, just to do that.
Oh, yes. I may be hitting you up to speak at one of our Executive Council Network events. I think we're going to do one on those that have written a book and what that journey has been like.
Sure. I'd love to do that. Thank you.
You can feel free to keep jabbing on if you have a couple more sort of high level key takeaways or other points that you wanted to raise. We have about 3 minutes.
Oh, great. Well, so maybe one other point, just to make sure that we are able to finish up on time. This point I mentioned earlier about all transformation is change, but not all change is transformational, turns out to be something that I walked away from putting this book together believing. You know, there's a lot of very specific, precise, very legitimate and needed changes that are happening in our lives as individuals, and certainly with our teams and with our organizations. But, you know, in order to really qualify in my mind as a transformational change, it's got to be deeper, it's got to be more systemic, it's got to be more holistic, it's got to be longer lasting. And in some way or another, it tends to need to touch on overall improvement in the effectiveness or the safety or the health of you as a person, or the team that you're trying to lead, or the organization that you're trying to build, or perhaps even society as a whole. So I do in fact think all transformation is change, but not all change is transformational in terms of meeting the sort of criteria that I just mentioned.
Yeah, and that's words of wisdom. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily sort of take that to heart as they start to look at it initially. So it's almost like a learned, I don't know, learned skill or learned viewpoint, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, certainly for me it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. Once again, thank you so much. We're so very lucky to have access to so many amazing leaders that are also speakers and willing to come and share their lessons and their wisdom for our folks. So appreciate you. Thank you very much. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks for the invite. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Bye-bye.